Question 1. The control framework reveals that a new, highly complex infusion pump with advanced software features is being introduced into a critical care unit. To ensure patient safety and regulatory compliance, which hazard analysis and risk assessment technique would be most appropriate for evaluating potential failure modes and their associated risks? Option A. A qualitative risk assessment focusing only on events with catastrophic severity, regardless of likelihood. Option B. A failure modes and effects analysis (FME) combined with a fault tree analysis (FTA) for critical failure paths. Option C. A simple checklist of common infusion pump failures based on historical data from less complex devices. Option D. A hazard operability study (HAZOP) applied broadly to the entire hospital workflow involving the pump. Correct answer is B. A failure modes and effects analysis (FME) combined with a fault tree analysis (FTA) for critical failure paths. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a clinical engineer to select the most appropriate hazard analysis and risk assessment technique for a new, complex medical device intended for critical care. The challenge lies in balancing the need for thoroughness with practical considerations like time, resources, and the specific nature of the device's potential failure modes. Careful judgment is required to ensure patient safety without causing undue delays in device implementation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and comprehensive evaluation of potential hazards and their associated risks, directly aligning with the core principles of clinical engineering and regulatory expectations for patient safety. This approach ensures that all foreseeable failure modes are identified, their likelihood and severity are assessed, and appropriate mitigation strategies are developed. This proactive stance is fundamental to preventing adverse events and is implicitly or explicitly supported by regulatory frameworks that mandate risk management for medical devices. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical data for similar devices fails to account for the unique design, software, or intended use of the new device, potentially overlooking novel hazards. This is a regulatory failure as it does not meet the requirement for a device-specific risk assessment. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on high-severity, low-probability events neglects common cause failures, or those with moderate severity but high likelihood, which can cumulatively lead to significant patient harm. This is an ethical failure, as it prioritizes certain types of risk over others without a comprehensive, balanced assessment. An approach that uses a qualitative method for a device with complex failure modes and significant potential for harm is also incorrect. While qualitative methods can be useful, they may lack the precision needed to adequately characterize and prioritize risks for highly critical applications, leading to a potential regulatory failure if the assessment is deemed insufficient by oversight bodies. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the device's intended use, complexity, and criticality. This involves consulting relevant standards and guidelines e.g. ISO 14971 for medical device risk management. The next step is to identify potential hazards and failure modes, considering both the device's design and its operational environment. Subsequently, the likelihood and severity of harm associated with each failure mode must be assessed. The choice of risk assessment technique should be guided by the nature of the identified risks. For complex devices with critical functions, more rigorous, quantitative, or semi-quantitative methods may be necessary. Finally, mitigation strategies should be developed, implemented, and their effectiveness verified, with the entire process documented thoroughly. Question 2. Consider a scenario where a critical care unit reports intermittent alarms on a ventilator that are not associated with any identifiable patient physiological changes or ventilator parameter deviations. The clinical engineering department has confirmed the intermittent alarm behavior during testing, but the root cause is not immediately apparent. The hospital's policy requires immediate reporting of any device malfunction that could potentially impact patient safety. What is the most appropriate course of action for the clinical engineering department? Option A. Continue to monitor the ventilator closely and document the intermittent alarms, assuming the issue is minor and will resolve itself, while prioritizing other departmental tasks. Option B. Immediately notify the ventilator manufacturer of the intermittent alarm issue, document the findings, and initiate a risk assessment to determine appropriate interim patient monitoring strategies and the need for device replacement or removal from service while the manufacturer investigates. Option C. Attempt to resolve the intermittent alarm issue solely through internal troubleshooting and software adjustments without involving the manufacturer to avoid potential delays and costs associated with external support. Option D. Immediately remove the ventilator from service and quarantine it for further investigation without notifying the clinical team or the manufacturer to prevent any potential risk to patients. The correct answer is B. Immediately notify the ventilator manufacturer of the intermittent alarm issue, document the findings, and initiate a risk assessment to determine appropriate interim patient monitoring strategies and the need for device replacement or removal from service while the manufacturer investigates. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering, balancing patient safety, regulatory compliance, and operational efficiency when a critical therapeutic device exhibits a potential defect. The professional challenge lies in making an informed decision that prioritizes patient well-being while adhering to established standards and guidelines. The rapid escalation of a potential issue with a ventilator, a life-sustaining device, demands immediate and decisive action. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the potential risk to patient safety through a systematic and documented process. It involves immediate notification of the manufacturer, which is a fundamental requirement for addressing device malfunctions and potential recalls. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate reporting of adverse events and device deficiencies to ensure that manufacturers can investigate and implement corrective actions. Furthermore, it involves a thorough risk assessment and the implementation of interim safety measures, such as close patient monitoring and the availability of backup equipment, which are critical for mitigating harm during the investigation. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to patient care and adherence to ethical principles of beneficence and non-maleficence. An incorrect approach that involves delaying notification to the manufacturer or attempting to resolve the issue solely through internal troubleshooting without manufacturer involvement is professionally unacceptable. This failure to report a potential device defect to the manufacturer violates regulatory requirements for adverse event reporting and can hinder the manufacturer's ability to identify and address a systemic problem that might affect other patients or devices. Such delays can lead to continued patient harm and potential regulatory penalties. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately removing the device from service without a documented risk assessment or clear communication plan, could disrupt patient care unnecessarily and lead to operational inefficiencies without a clear justification based on the severity of the identified risk. This lacks the systematic, evidence-based decision-making expected of a clinical engineer. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with immediate identification and documentation of the issue. This should be followed by an assessment of the potential risk to patient safety, considering the device's function and the patient's condition. The next step involves consulting relevant manufacturer documentation, internal policies, and applicable regulations. Communication with the clinical team is paramount to ensure patient care is not compromised. Based on this assessment, a decision is made regarding the appropriate course of action, which may include immediate removal, continued use with enhanced monitoring, or consultation with the manufacturer. All actions and decisions must be meticulously documented. Question 3. The investigation demonstrates that a critical piece of patient monitoring equipment has failed unexpectedly, leading to an urgent need for replacement. The clinical engineering department has identified a potential vendor whose product meets the immediate technical specifications, but the vendor has limited prior engagement with the institution and has not undergone the full standard vendor qualification process. The department is under significant pressure from clinical staff to expedite the acquisition. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for vendor management and procurement in this situation? Option A. Expedite the procurement by accepting the vendor's assurances of compliance and product quality, and initiate the standard vendor qualification process concurrently with the equipment order to minimize delay. Option B. Reject the vendor due to their lack of established qualification, and delay the acquisition until a fully qualified vendor with a proven track record can be identified, even if it means a longer period without the critical equipment. Option C. Initiate a rapid, but still formal vendor assessment process that includes a review of the vendor's regulatory compliance documentation, references, and a preliminary technical evaluation, while simultaneously exploring alternative, pre-qualified vendors as a contingency. Option D. Immediately procure the equipment from the identified vendor, bypassing the standard vendor qualification process due to the urgent clinical need, with a plan to address any compliance issues post-installation. The correct answer is A. Expedite the procurement by accepting the vendor's assurances of compliance and product quality, and initiate the standard vendor qualification process concurrently with the equipment order to minimize delay. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the immediate need for critical medical equipment with the imperative to adhere to established procurement processes and vendor management best practices. The pressure to acquire a life-saving device quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise due diligence, potentially resulting in suboptimal equipment, inflated costs, or even regulatory noncompliance. Clinical engineers must navigate these competing demands while upholding their ethical and professional responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, evidence-based decision-making process aligned with regulatory requirements for procurement and vendor management. This involves a thorough evaluation of vendor capabilities, product suitability, and adherence to institutional policies and relevant U.S. federal regulations, e.g., those pertaining to healthcare procurement, such as those that might be referenced by CMS or FDA guidelines indirectly impacting procurement choices, and institutional policies derived from them. It ensures that the chosen vendor and equipment meet not only immediate clinical needs, but also long-term operational, safety, and financial considerations, thereby minimizing risk and maximizing value. This systematic approach is crucial for maintaining the integrity of the procurement process and ensuring patient safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach fails by bypassing a formal vendor assessment, which is a critical step in ensuring vendor reliability and compliance with regulatory standards and institutional policies. This bypass can lead to engaging with vendors who lack the necessary certifications, financial stability, or a history of providing safe and effective medical devices, thereby exposing the healthcare facility to significant risks, including equipment failure, lack of support, and potential legal liabilities. It also violates principles of fair and transparent procurement. Another incorrect approach is to solely prioritize the lowest bid without a comprehensive evaluation of the total cost of ownership, including maintenance, service contracts, training, and potential downtime. This can lead to selecting a seemingly cheaper option that proves more expensive in the long run and may compromise the quality or longevity of the equipment, impacting patient care and operational efficiency. It disregards the broader value proposition and can be seen as a failure to exercise due diligence in financial stewardship and risk management. A third incorrect approach involves accepting a vendor's assurances without independent verification or due diligence. This can lead to the acquisition of equipment that does not meet specified performance standards, regulatory requirements, or safety protocols. It bypasses essential steps in the procurement process designed to protect the institution and its patients from substandard products and unreliable vendors, representing a significant ethical and professional lapse. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that integrates clinical needs, regulatory compliance, financial prudence, and risk management. This framework involves 1. Defining clear requirements and specifications. 2. Conducting thorough market research and vendor pre-qualification. 3. Developing a comprehensive request for proposal RFP or similar solicitation document. 4. Evaluating proposals based on predefined criteria: technical, financial, service, regulatory compliance. 5. Performing due diligence on shortlisted vendors. 6. Negotiating terms and contracts that protect the institution. 7. Establishing clear vendor performance metrics and ongoing monitoring. This structured approach ensures that decisions are objective, defensible, and aligned with the best interests of the patient and the organization. Question 4. Upon reviewing the current workflow for managing software updates for networked medical devices, a clinical engineering department identifies several inefficiencies. To optimize this process, which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines for the Certified in Clinical Engineering (CCE) exam, specifically focusing on FDA, ISO, and AMI standards? Option A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the proposed changes, validate the optimized process against FDA's Quality System Regulation (QSR) requirements, and ensure alignment with relevant AMI standards for medical device management and ISO principles for quality management. Option B. Prioritize immediate cost savings by reducing the number of validation steps in the update process, as long as the updates are from original equipment manufacturers. Option C. Implement a new, streamlined software update protocol based on industry best practices, assuming that faster deployment inherently improves safety and compliance. Option D. Develop a custom software solution for managing updates, bypassing existing vendor-provided update mechanisms to gain greater control and efficiency. The correct answer is C. Implement a new, streamlined software update protocol based on industry best practices, assuming that faster deployment inherently improves safety and compliance. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering, balancing the need for efficient process optimization with strict adherence to regulatory requirements. The core difficulty lies in identifying improvements that enhance operational effectiveness without compromising patient safety or regulatory compliance, particularly concerning the FDA's Quality System Regulation (QSR) and relevant ISO and AMI standards. The correct approach focuses on a systematic, data-driven methodology that integrates regulatory considerations from the outset. This ensures that any proposed optimization is not only efficient but also compliant, thereby mitigating risks of non-compliance, recalls, or adverse events. It prioritizes understanding the existing regulatory landscape and embedding compliance into the optimization process itself. This aligns with the principles of quality by design, a cornerstone of modern regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches fail by either neglecting regulatory implications entirely, prioritizing speed over thoroughness, or making assumptions about compliance. One incorrect approach might overlook the need for validation of changes under the QSR, potentially leading to unapproved modifications to medical device software or hardware. Another might assume that a generic best practice is sufficient, without verifying its alignment with specific FDA guidance or AMI standards for clinical engineering processes. A third might focus solely on cost savings without a comprehensive risk assessment, which is a critical component of regulatory compliance and patient safety. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured approach. First, thoroughly understand the current regulatory requirements applicable to the devices and processes in question. FDA QSR, relevant ISO standards like ISO 13485, if applicable to the manufacturer's processes, and AMI standards for medical device management. Second, conduct a comprehensive risk assessment for any proposed changes, considering potential impacts on device performance, safety, and regulatory status. Third, involve relevant stakeholders, including quality assurance personnel and, if necessary, regulatory affairs, to ensure all perspectives are considered. Finally, document all changes, validations, and justifications meticulously to demonstrate compliance. Question 5. Process analysis reveals that a hospital's medical device maintenance program has historically relied on a reactive approach, addressing device malfunctions only after they occur. To improve efficiency and reduce costs, a proposal is being considered to shift towards a more proactive quality assurance strategy for a critical class Roman II medical device. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of quality assurance and control within the U.S. regulatory framework for medical devices? Option A. Relying exclusively on the device manufacturer's post-market surveillance reports to identify any potential quality issues, without conducting independent internal assessments or verifications. Option B. Reducing the frequency of routine inspections and focusing maintenance efforts solely on devices that have recently experienced a reported malfunction, with the aim of minimizing labor costs. Option C. Delegating all quality assurance checks for this device to the biomedical technicians, without establishing specific performance benchmarks or a formal review process for their findings. Option D. Implementing a comprehensive preventive maintenance schedule based on manufacturer recommendations and historical failure data, coupled with regular performance verification testing, and a robust system for trending device performance metrics to identify potential issues before they impact patient care. The correct answer is D. Implementing a comprehensive preventive maintenance schedule based on manufacturer recommendations and historical failure data, coupled with regular performance verification testing, and a robust system for trending device performance metrics to identify potential issues before they impact patient care. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering, ensuring the ongoing quality and safety of medical devices in a dynamic healthcare environment. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for device functionality with the long-term implications of quality assurance and control processes, particularly when faced with resource constraints or competing priorities. Careful judgment is required to select the most effective and compliant approach. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the principles of a robust quality management system, QMS, as mandated by regulatory frameworks like the FDA's Quality System Regulation, 21 CFR Part 820, in the United States, which is the governing framework for the CCE exam. This approach emphasizes proactive identification and mitigation of risks through systematic review and data-driven decision-making, ensuring that device performance and patient safety are continuously monitored and improved. It reflects a commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility by prioritizing patient well-being and device efficacy. An incorrect approach that relies solely on reactive measures, such as addressing issues only when they become critical failures, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This reactive stance fails to meet the proactive requirements of a QMS, potentially leading to patient harm and noncompliance with regulations that expect systematic risk management. It also demonstrates a failure to implement effective quality control, which should identify deviations before they escalate. Another incorrect approach that focuses exclusively on cost reduction without a corresponding assessment of quality impact is also professionally unacceptable. This approach violates the ethical obligation to prioritize patient safety and device effectiveness over financial considerations. It can lead to the use of substandard components or processes, increasing the risk of device malfunction and potential harm, and is a direct contravention of QMS principles that require quality to be maintained regardless of cost pressures. A third incorrect approach that delegates quality assurance responsibilities without adequate oversight or defined accountability is a failure in both regulatory compliance and professional ethics. This can result in a breakdown of the QMS, inconsistent application of quality standards, and a lack of clear responsibility when issues arise, all of which are unacceptable under regulatory scrutiny. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the proposed actions against the established QMS, relevant regulatory requirements, specifically 21 CFR Part 820 for the U.S. context, and ethical principles. This includes assessing the potential impact on patient safety, device performance, and regulatory compliance. Professionals should utilize risk assessment tools, consult relevant documentation, and engage in interdisciplinary collaboration to ensure that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with the highest standards of clinical engineering practice. Question 6. Examination of the data shows a critical patient requiring a specific, albeit older, model of infusion pump for a complex medication titration. The physician has requested this particular pump, citing familiarity and a perceived advantage in its specific control features for this delicate procedure. However, the hospital's current policy, driven by a recent risk assessment, prioritizes the use of newer, networked infusion pumps for all critical care titrations due to enhanced safety features and data logging capabilities. The clinical engineering department has been informed of the physician's request and the policy conflict. Which of the following actions best defines the clinical engineer's role and scope in this situation, adhering to the principles of clinical engineering practice? Option A. Immediately inform the physician that the older pump cannot be used due to hospital policy and insist on the use of a newer, networked pump, regardless of the physician's clinical judgment. Option B. Initiate a formal review of the physician's request, assessing the specific risks and benefits of using the older pump versus the newer models in this unique clinical context, and facilitate a discussion between the physician, nursing leadership, and biomedical services to reach a consensus that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance. Option C. Advise the physician to proceed with the older pump, assuming the physician's clinical judgment supersedes hospital policy in critical situations, and document the physician's request without further involvement. Option D. Escalate the issue to hospital administration without consulting the clinical team or performing any technical assessment, leaving the decision entirely to administrative directives. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal review of the physician's request, assessing the specific risks and benefits of using the older pump versus the newer models in this unique clinical context, and facilitate a discussion between the physician, nursing leadership, and biomedical services to reach a consensus that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a clinical engineer to balance competing priorities: patient safety, organizational policy, and the ethical obligation to advocate for appropriate resources. The core of the dilemma lies in defining the scope of clinical engineering responsibilities when faced with a situation that falls outside typical equipment maintenance but directly impacts patient care. The challenge is amplified by the potential for misinterpretation of the clinical engineer's role, leading to either overreach or abdication of responsibility. Correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the fundamental definition and scope of clinical engineering, which encompasses ensuring the safe and effective use of medical technology throughout its life cycle. This includes not only direct maintenance, but also advising on technology selection, implementation, and the development of policies and procedures that support safe patient care. By initiating a review and seeking clarification, the clinical engineer is acting proactively to address a potential risk to patient safety, fulfilling their ethical and professional duty. This approach respects the established hierarchy and departmental responsibilities while asserting the clinical engineer's critical role in technology-related patient safety. An incorrect approach that involves ignoring the issue or assuming it is solely the responsibility of another department fails to uphold the clinical engineer's commitment to patient safety and the broad scope of their practice. This abdication of responsibility could lead to a preventable adverse event, violating ethical principles and potentially regulatory guidelines that mandate a proactive approach to medical device safety. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately overriding the physician's decision and dictating a different course of action without proper consultation or understanding of the clinical context, represents an overreach of authority. While the clinical engineer's expertise is valuable, it must be applied within the collaborative framework of patient care, respecting the roles of other healthcare professionals. This could undermine trust and lead to conflict, hindering effective patient management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic assessment of the potential impact on patient safety, a clear understanding of the clinical engineer's defined scope of practice and responsibilities, and a commitment to collaborative problem-solving. This includes identifying stakeholders, gathering relevant information, consulting organizational policies and professional guidelines, and communicating effectively to reach a resolution that prioritizes patient well-being and adheres to ethical and regulatory standards. Question 7. Performance analysis shows that a critical diagnostic imaging device is exhibiting intermittent signal degradation, which has been noted by several users. The device is currently essential for a high volume of patient procedures. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the clinical engineering department? Option A. Continue using the device, but instruct users to document any further instances of signal degradation and to manually verify critical readings. Option B. Attempt a temporary software patch or adjustment to mitigate the signal degradation without a full calibration. Option C. Immediately remove the device from service for a comprehensive diagnostic evaluation and recalibration by qualified personnel. Option D. Defer a full diagnostic evaluation and recalibration until the next scheduled preventative maintenance cycle. The correct answer is C. Immediately remove the device from service for a comprehensive diagnostic evaluation and recalibration by qualified personnel. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering, balancing immediate equipment availability with the long-term integrity of the medical device inventory. A critical piece of equipment is showing intermittent performance issues, and the immediate need for patient care necessitates its use. However, the underlying problem, if unaddressed, could lead to more significant failures, patient safety risks, and increased long-term costs for repair and replacement. The professional challenge lies in making a decision that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance, while also considering operational efficiency and resource management. The correct approach, which involves immediately removing the equipment from service for a thorough diagnostic evaluation and calibration by qualified personnel, represents best professional practice. This aligns with regulatory frameworks such as those overseen by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, for medical device quality systems and maintenance. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of ensuring medical devices are safe and effective for their intended use, as mandated by 21 CFR Part 820, Quality System Regulation. Prompt and proper maintenance, including calibration, is a cornerstone of preventing device malfunction and ensuring accurate diagnostic or therapeutic outcomes, thereby protecting patient safety. This proactive stance also supports the hospital's overall risk management program and can prevent costly emergency repairs or patient harm. An incorrect approach would be to continue using the equipment with a note to the user about the intermittent issue. This fails to meet the fundamental regulatory requirement of ensuring medical devices are maintained in a state of good repair and proper functioning. It directly contravenes the principles of patient safety by exposing patients to the risk of inaccurate readings or therapeutic failures. Ethically, it represents a failure to uphold the duty of care owed to patients. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt a quick fix or bypass the calibration procedure, relying solely on the user's observation. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established protocols for ensuring device accuracy and reliability. Calibration is a systematic process performed by trained professionals to verify and adjust a device's performance against established standards. Without this, the device's readings or outputs cannot be trusted, leading to potential misdiagnosis or incorrect treatment. This also violates regulatory expectations for documented maintenance and verification processes. A third incorrect approach would be to defer the comprehensive calibration until a scheduled maintenance cycle, despite the observed intermittent performance. This neglects the immediate need to address a potential safety issue. While scheduled maintenance is important, it is not a substitute for addressing emergent performance anomalies that could compromise patient care or device integrity. This approach prioritizes convenience over patient safety and regulatory compliance, which is a critical failure in clinical engineering practice. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a risk-based assessment. First, evaluate the potential impact of the intermittent performance on patient safety and diagnostic/therapeutic accuracy. Second, consult the manufacturer's recommended maintenance and calibration schedules and procedures. Third, consider the hospital's internal policies and procedures for equipment management and incident reporting. Finally, make a decision that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance, even if it means temporarily taking equipment out of service. Documentation of the observed issue, the decision-making process, and the corrective actions taken is paramount. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a specific medical device malfunction that could lead to a minor patient injury, but the potential for widespread disruption to a critical care unit if the malfunction occurs during peak operational hours. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the clinical engineer? Option A. Initiate a formal investigation to determine the root cause of the potential malfunction. Engage relevant clinical staff and department heads for input and develop a comprehensive risk mitigation plan. Option B. Recommend the immediate decommissioning of the device and procurement of a replacement without a detailed analysis of the current device's failure modes. Option C. Immediately implement a temporary workaround for the device to prevent any possibility of malfunction without further investigation. Option D. Document the risk but defer any action until a patient injury is reported or the malfunction occurs. Correct answer is A. Initiate a formal investigation to determine the root cause of the potential malfunction, engage relevant clinical staff and department heads for input, and develop a comprehensive risk mitigation plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a clinical engineer to balance patient safety, operational efficiency, and resource allocation within a complex healthcare environment. The identified risk, while not immediately catastrophic, has the potential for significant patient harm and disruption if not addressed proactively. The clinical engineer must navigate competing priorities, potential resistance from departments, and the need for evidence-based decision-making. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the core responsibilities of a clinical engineer as defined by professional standards and ethical guidelines, such as those promoted by AMI, Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, and implied within the scope of the CCE certification. This approach prioritizes patient safety by initiating a systematic investigation and risk assessment. It involves collaboration with relevant stakeholders, biomedical services, nursing, physicians, and administration to gather comprehensive data, understand the root cause, and develop a robust mitigation strategy. This aligns with the ethical imperative to act in the best interest of the patient and uphold the integrity of medical technology. The process ensures that decisions are data-driven, transparent, and contribute to a culture of continuous improvement in patient care delivery. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves delaying action due to perceived low immediate risk. This fails to meet the ethical obligation to proactively identify and mitigate potential hazards. Regulatory frameworks and professional ethics emphasize a proactive rather than reactive stance on patient safety. Ignoring or downplaying a documented risk, even if not currently causing harm, can lead to significant patient injury or adverse events, violating the principle of do no harm and potentially exposing the institution to liability. Another incorrect approach is to implement a quick fix without thorough investigation. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the critical step of root cause analysis. Without understanding the underlying issues, any implemented solution may be ineffective, temporary, or even introduce new risks. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to apply systematic problem-solving methodologies expected of a certified clinical engineer. It also undermines the credibility of the clinical engineering department by not providing a comprehensive and sustainable solution. A third incorrect approach is to unilaterally decide on a solution without consulting relevant departments. This violates principles of collaboration and interdisciplinary teamwork, which are crucial in healthcare. Clinical engineers must work with end users and other stakeholders to ensure that solutions are practical, effective, and integrated into existing workflows. Ignoring departmental input can lead to solutions that are not adopted, are difficult to implement, or create new operational challenges, ultimately failing to achieve the desired safety and efficiency outcomes. This also represents a failure in communication and stakeholder management, key aspects of effective clinical engineering practice. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with risk identification and assessment. This involves understanding the potential severity and likelihood of harm. Following this, a thorough investigation to determine the root cause is essential. Once the cause is understood, a systematic evaluation of potential solutions should be conducted, considering efficacy, cost, feasibility, and impact on patient care. Stakeholder engagement throughout this process is paramount. Finally, the chosen solution should be implemented, monitored, and evaluated for effectiveness, fostering a continuous improvement cycle. This framework ensures that decisions are evidence-based, ethically sound, and aligned with regulatory requirements and professional best practices. Question 9. Analysis of a situation where a patient with a recent lower limb amputation expresses a strong preference for a specific advanced prosthetic limb, citing its aesthetic appeal and perceived performance benefits advertised online. Despite the clinical team's assessment that a more basic, robust prosthetic might be more suitable for their current functional level and home environment, the clinical engineer is tasked with evaluating the feasibility and appropriateness of the patient's preferred device, which course of action best upholds professional responsibilities and patient well-being. Option A. Conduct a thorough clinical evaluation of the patient's current functional capabilities and the proposed prosthetic's technical specifications, risks, and benefits, in collaboration with the rehabilitation team and the patient, to determine the most appropriate and safe prosthetic solution. Option B. Proceed with fitting the patient's preferred prosthetic device as requested, prioritizing patient satisfaction and autonomy above all other considerations. Option C. Advise the patient that their preference cannot be accommodated due to the clinical team's assessment, without further detailed discussion of alternative options or the rationale behind the recommendation. Option D. Rely solely on the manufacturer's marketing materials and the patient's enthusiastic endorsement to justify the selection of the advanced prosthetic device. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough clinical evaluation of the patient's current functional capabilities and the proposed prosthetics technical specifications, risks, and benefits, in collaboration with the rehabilitation team and the patient, to determine the most appropriate and safe prosthetic solution. Explanation. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in clinical engineering involving patient autonomy, informed consent, and the responsible application of rehabilitation technology. The challenge lies in balancing the patient's expressed wishes with the clinical team's professional judgment regarding the suitability and safety of a specific prosthetic device. The clinical engineer must navigate potential conflicts between patient desires, manufacturer recommendations, and established clinical protocols, all while upholding patient well-being and professional integrity. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based assessment of the patient's needs and the prosthetic device's capabilities, coupled with open and transparent communication. This aligns with the ethical principles of beneficence, acting in the patient's best interest, non-maleficence, avoiding harm, and respect for patient autonomy. Specifically, it adheres to the CCE's emphasis on ensuring that medical devices, including prosthetics, are appropriate for the intended use in patient population, and that patients are fully informed about the risks and benefits of their treatment options. This approach involves a collaborative decision-making process with the patient and the clinical team, ensuring that any prosthetic selection is not only technically sound, but also aligned with the patient's functional goals and lifestyle. An incorrect approach that proceeds with the patient's preferred prosthetic without a comprehensive evaluation risks violating the principle of non-maleficence. If the device is not adequately suited for the patient's current functional level or activity demands, it could lead to injury, pain, or reduced mobility, directly contradicting the goal of rehabilitation. Another incorrect approach, which dismisses the patient's preference outright without adequate justification, fails to respect patient autonomy and can erode trust in the clinical team. This can lead to patient dissatisfaction and non-adherence to treatment. A third incorrect approach, which relies solely on the manufacturer's marketing claims without independent clinical validation, is professionally negligent. Clinical engineers have a responsibility to critically evaluate device performance and suitability based on evidence and patient-specific factors, not just promotional material. Professionals should approach such situations by first gathering all relevant information: patient history, functional assessment, clinical team recommendations, and detailed specifications of the prosthetic device. They should then facilitate a discussion that clearly outlines the pros and cons of different prosthetic options, including the patient's preferred choice, in a manner that the patient can understand. The decision-making process should be iterative, allowing for adjustments based on ongoing assessment and patient feedback, always prioritizing safety, efficacy, and patient-centered care within the regulatory framework. Question 10. Quality control measures reveal that a critical patient monitoring device is exhibiting a slight but consistent deviation from its specified performance parameters during routine testing. The deviation does not appear to be impacting immediate patient care, but it falls outside the acceptable tolerance range defined in the device's technical manual and the hospital's internal quality assurance protocols. What is the most appropriate course of action for the clinical engineering department to ensure patient safety and regulatory compliance? Option A. Initiate a documented investigation involving the device manufacturer to assess the deviation, determine its root cause, and implement appropriate corrective actions, while ensuring the device remains in service only if the risk assessment deems it safe. Option B. Attempt to recalibrate the device using internal procedures without involving the manufacturer, assuming the deviation is minor and easily correctable. Option C. Immediately remove the device from service and quarantine it until a full investigation can be completed, without consulting the manufacturer. Option D. Document the deviation in the device's maintenance log, but allow it to remain in clinical use without further immediate action, as it is not currently affecting patient care. The correct answer is A. Initiate a documented investigation involving the device manufacturer to assess the deviation, determine its root cause, and implement appropriate corrective actions, while ensuring the device remains in service only if the risk assessment deems it safe. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering, balancing the immediate need for functional equipment with the imperative of ensuring patient safety and regulatory compliance. The discovery of a deviation from established performance specifications, even if seemingly minor, necessitates a thorough evaluation to prevent potential harm to patients or staff, and to maintain the integrity of the hospital's quality management system. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action without causing undue disruption to clinical operations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes patient safety and regulatory adherence by initiating a documented investigation. This aligns with the principles of a robust quality management system, as mandated by regulatory bodies overseeing medical devices and healthcare facilities. Specifically, it reflects the requirements for device evaluation, risk assessment, and corrective action. By involving the manufacturer, the hospital leverages their expertise and ensures that any remediation is performed according to approved procedures, thereby upholding best practices in medical device management and patient care. This systematic approach ensures that the root cause is identified and appropriate corrective and preventive actions are implemented, safeguarding against recurrence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves ignoring the deviation because the device appears to be functioning adequately. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses the established quality control processes designed to proactively identify and mitigate risks. Regulatory frameworks require that all deviations from specifications be investigated, regardless of apparent immediate impact, as subtle performance degradation can lead to delayed diagnosis, incorrect treatment, or equipment failure during critical procedures. Ethically, it compromises the duty of care owed to patients. Another incorrect approach is to immediately attempt self-repair without consulting the manufacturer or adhering to established protocols. This poses a serious risk of exacerbating the problem, rendering the device unsafe, or voiding warranties. It violates regulatory guidelines that often mandate manufacturer involvement for repairs and modifications to ensure device integrity and traceability. Furthermore, it bypasses the necessary documentation and validation steps required for medical device maintenance, which are critical for compliance and patient safety. A third incorrect approach is to simply remove the device from service without further investigation or communication. While removing a potentially faulty device is a safety measure, doing so without a documented investigation and communication with relevant stakeholders, e.g., clinical staff, biomedical engineering leadership, manufacturer, is inefficient and disruptive. It fails to address the root cause of the problem and may lead to unnecessary equipment shortages. Best practice dictates a structured approach to device management, including investigation and resolution, not just passive removal. Professional reasoning. When faced with such a situation, a clinical engineer should follow a structured decision-making process. 1. Acknowledge and document the deviation. 2. Initiate a risk assessment to understand the potential impact on patient safety and clinical operations. 3. Consult relevant internal policies and procedures, as well as manufacturer guidelines and regulatory requirements. 4. Engage with the manufacturer for guidance and potential corrective actions. 5. Implement corrective actions in a documented and validated manner. 6. Communicate findings and actions to relevant stakeholders. 7. Monitor the device and process to ensure effectiveness of corrective actions. Question 11. Governance review demonstrates a critical diagnostic imaging device has failed, impacting patient scheduling and potentially delaying urgent diagnosis. The clinical engineering department is tasked with its rapid restoration. Which of the following troubleshooting and repair approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for ensuring patient safety and device integrity? Option A. Immediately initiate a repair based on the lead biomedical technician's prior experience with similar, but not identical, device failures, bypassing formal documentation and manufacturer guidelines to expedite service. Option B. Attempt a series of common fixes suggested by online forums and peer discussions among biomedical technicians, prioritizing speed of restoration over detailed diagnostic investigation or formal record keeping. Option C. Systematically follow the manufacturer's approved service manual for troubleshooting, document all diagnostic steps and findings meticulously, and engage the manufacturer's authorized service representative if the issue cannot be resolved by internal qualified personnel. Option D. Temporarily disable the device from the network to prevent further potential issues and await a scheduled, routine maintenance visit from the manufacturer in several weeks, accepting the current patient care disruption. Correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a repair based on the lead biomedical technician's prior experience with similar, but not identical, device failures, bypassing formal documentation and manufacturer guidelines to expedite service. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a critical medical device failure that directly impacts patient care and safety. The clinical engineer must balance the immediate need for device functionality with the imperative to adhere to established protocols and regulatory requirements. The pressure to restore service quickly can tempt shortcuts, but these can lead to significant risks, including misdiagnosis, improper treatment, and potential harm to patients. Furthermore, the involvement of multiple stakeholders, clinical staff, biomedical technicians, and potentially manufacturers, requires clear communication and coordinated action within a defined governance framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a systematic, documented, and compliant troubleshooting process. This aligns with the core principles of clinical engineering practice, which emphasize patient safety, device efficacy, and regulatory adherence. By following the manufacturer's service manual and involving authorized service personnel when necessary, the clinical engineer ensures that repairs are performed correctly, safely, and in accordance with established standards. Documenting all steps taken, including diagnostic findings and repair actions, is crucial for maintaining an accurate device history, facilitating future troubleshooting, and demonstrating compliance with regulatory requirements for medical device maintenance and repair. This approach upholds the ethical obligation to provide safe and effective medical technology. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves attempting a repair without consulting the manufacturer's documentation or involving authorized personnel. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it bypasses established safety and efficacy protocols. Unqualified repairs can introduce new faults, compromise device performance, and potentially lead to patient harm, violating the fundamental duty of care. It also likely violates manufacturer warranties and may contravene regulations requiring that medical devices be maintained by qualified individuals. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize immediate device restoration over thorough troubleshooting and documentation. While speed is often a concern in clinical settings, rushing the process without proper diagnosis and documentation can lead to recurring issues, misidentification of the root cause, and an incomplete or inaccurate device record. This undermines the principles of effective asset management and can hinder future problem solving, potentially leading to prolonged downtime or repeated failures. It also fails to meet regulatory expectations for diligent maintenance and repair. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the anecdotal experience of biomedical technicians without verifying findings or adhering to formal procedures. While experience is valuable, it must be grounded in established protocols and validated through systematic investigation. Relying solely on informal knowledge can lead to overlooking critical diagnostic steps, misinterpreting symptoms, or implementing solutions that are not universally applicable or compliant. This approach lacks the rigor required for safe and effective medical device management and can be a compliance risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach medical device troubleshooting with a structured, evidence-based methodology. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of patient impact and safety. 2. Systematic consultation of official documentation, manufacturer manuals, internal policies. 3. Logical diagnostic steps to identify the root cause. 4. Adherence to established repair procedures, including escalation to authorized personnel when required. 5. Meticulous documentation of all findings, actions, and outcomes. And 6. Verification of device performance post-repair to ensure safety and efficacy. This framework ensures that patient safety is paramount, regulatory compliance is maintained, and the long-term integrity of the medical device asset is preserved. Question 12. Research into the acquisition of a new diagnostic imaging system for a hospital department has highlighted a pressing need for improved diagnostic capabilities. The clinical team has expressed strong enthusiasm for a particular vendor's offering, citing its advanced features. However, the project manager in clinical engineering is concerned about ensuring a thorough evaluation process before committing significant resources. Which approach best ensures that the project aligns with both clinical needs and regulatory expectations for medical device implementation? Option A. Delegate the entire impact assessment process to the clinical end users, trusting their expertise to identify the most suitable system without direct clinical engineering involvement in the evaluation criteria. Option B. Focus the evaluation primarily on securing the lowest initial purchase price for the imaging system, assuming that cost is the most critical factor for project success. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that evaluates clinical efficacy, operational integration, technical compatibility, financial implications, and regulatory compliance before proceeding with vendor selection and procurement. Option D. Prioritize immediate procurement of the most technologically advanced system favored by the clinical team to address the urgent diagnostic need, deferring detailed assessments to a later stage. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that evaluates clinical efficacy, operational integration, technical compatibility, financial implications, and regulatory compliance before proceeding with vendor selection and procurement. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering project management, balancing the immediate need for a new medical device with the comprehensive requirements of a regulatory-compliant project lifecycle. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the project, while driven by a clinical need, adheres to established project management principles and regulatory expectations without compromising patient safety or operational efficiency. Careful judgment is required to navigate competing priorities, resource constraints, and the inherent risks associated with introducing new technology. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it systematically addresses all phases of project management, from initiation and planning through execution, monitoring, control, and closure. This aligns with the principles of good clinical engineering practice, which emphasizes a structured and documented process for acquiring, implementing, and managing medical technology. Specifically, it ensures that the impact assessment is thorough, considering not only the clinical benefits, but also the operational, financial, technical, and regulatory implications. This comprehensive evaluation is crucial for informed decision-making and risk mitigation, directly supporting the ethical obligation to ensure the safety and efficacy of medical devices used in patient care, as implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory bodies overseeing healthcare technology. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate acquisition without a formal impact assessment fails to meet regulatory expectations for due diligence and risk management. This could lead to unforeseen operational disruptions, inadequate training, or the selection of a device that does not fully meet clinical needs or integrate with existing infrastructure, potentially compromising patient safety. Ethically, this bypasses the responsibility to ensure the technology is appropriate and safe for its intended use. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost savings without a comprehensive impact assessment overlooks critical factors such as long-term maintenance, serviceability, and the total cost of ownership. This can result in higher lifecycle costs and potential performance issues, violating the principle of responsible stewardship of healthcare resources, and potentially impacting patient care if the chosen device is not sustainable or reliable. A third incorrect approach that delegates the entire impact assessment to the clinical end users without clinical engineering oversight risks a lack of technical rigor and a failure to consider broader organizational impacts. While end-user input is vital, clinical engineers possess the specialized knowledge to evaluate technical specifications, integration requirements, regulatory compliance, and long-term supportability, ensuring a holistic and technically sound assessment. This oversight can lead to the selection of a device that, while meeting immediate user preferences, may not be technically or operationally viable in the long term, potentially leading to patient safety concerns or inefficient resource allocation. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured project initiation phase that includes defining project scope, objectives, and stakeholders. This is followed by a robust planning phase where a detailed impact assessment is conducted. This assessment should encompass clinical, operational, technical, financial, and regulatory domains. The execution phase should adhere to the established plan, with continuous monitoring and control to manage risks and deviations. Finally, a thorough closure phase ensures proper documentation, evaluation, and knowledge transfer. This systematic approach, guided by professional standards and regulatory requirements, ensures that projects are managed effectively, risks are mitigated, and the ultimate goal of providing safe and effective patient care through appropriate medical technology is achieved. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a newly developed medical device utilizes a novel combination of energy delivery and patient monitoring to achieve a therapeutic outcome. The device is intended for use in a critical care setting, directly interfacing with the patient's circulatory system for extended periods. Based on these preliminary findings, which of the following represents the most appropriate initial step for determining the device's classification under the relevant regulatory framework? Option A. Defer the classification decision entirely to the device manufacturer, relying on their internal assessment. Option B. Classify the device based on its similarity to existing devices used in critical care, assuming a comparable risk profile. Option C. Classify the device based on the technological sophistication and the cost of its components. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk analysis, evaluating the device's intended use, potential failure modes, and the severity of potential harm to patients and users to determine the appropriate risk class. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk analysis, evaluating the device's intended use, potential failure modes, and the severity of potential harm to patients and users to determine the appropriate risk class. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a clinical engineer to accurately classify a novel medical device based on its intended use and the potential risks it poses to patients and users. Misclassification can lead to significant regulatory noncompliance, patient harm, and financial penalties. The absence of direct precedent for this specific device necessitates a thorough understanding of the regulatory framework's classification criteria and a robust risk-based approach. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive evaluation of the device's intended use, its mechanism of action, and the potential risks associated with its failure or misuse. This aligns directly with the principles of risk-based regulation inherent in medical device classification frameworks. By considering the invasiveness, duration of use, and the potential for harm, the clinical engineer can determine the appropriate risk class, ensuring that the device is subject to the necessary level of regulatory scrutiny and post-market surveillance to protect public health. This methodical, risk-informed process is the cornerstone of responsible medical device management and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to classify the device based solely on its similarity to existing, well-established devices without a detailed risk assessment of the novel aspects. This fails to acknowledge that even minor design or functional differences can alter the risk profile and necessitate a different classification. It represents a regulatory failure by not adhering to the risk-based principles of classification, and an ethical failure by potentially underestimating risks to patients. Another incorrect approach would be to classify the device based on its perceived complexity or the cost of its components. Classification is determined by risk, not by technological sophistication or economic factors. This approach is a fundamental misunderstanding of the regulatory intent and constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it prioritizes non-risk-related attributes over patient safety. A third incorrect approach would be to defer classification to the manufacturer without independent clinical engineering review and risk assessment. While manufacturers have a primary responsibility for classification, clinical engineers have a duty to ensure the accuracy and appropriateness of this classification within their healthcare setting, especially for novel devices. This abdication of responsibility is a professional and ethical failure, potentially exposing the institution and its patients to undue risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach novel device classification by first thoroughly understanding the device's intended use and operational principles. This should be followed by a systematic risk assessment, considering factors such as invasiveness, energy delivery, potential for harm, and the target patient population. The classification should then be determined by applying the established criteria within the relevant regulatory framework, prioritizing patient safety and regulatory compliance. When in doubt, consulting with regulatory experts or seeking clarification from the regulatory body is a prudent step. Question 14. The assessment process reveals that critical patient monitoring device's oxygen saturation, SpO2, sensor is intermittently displaying readings that appear slightly lower than expected, Though no alarms are currently active, the device is within its manufacturer-recommended service interval. What is the most appropriate course of action for the clinical engineer? Option A. Document the intermittent readings and continue to monitor the device, as the readings are not triggering alarms and the device is within its service interval. Option B. Perform a diagnostic test of the SpO2 sensor and compare its readings against a known accurate reference standard, considering the device's intended use and patient population. Option C. Immediately replace the SpO2 sensor to ensure optimal patient monitoring, as any deviation from expected readings could be a precursor to a critical failure. Option D. Assume the SpO2 sensor is functioning adequately because it is within its stated lifespan and no alarms are present. The correct answer is B. Perform a diagnostic test of the SpO2 sensor and compare its readings against a known accurate reference standard, considering the device's intended use and patient population. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical nature of medical device sensors and transducers in patient care. A failure or degradation in these components can lead to inaccurate diagnostic information, incorrect therapeutic delivery, or complete device malfunction, directly impacting patient safety and clinical outcomes. The clinical engineer must balance the need for timely device availability with the imperative of ensuring the reliability and accuracy of these vital sensing elements. This requires a deep understanding of sensor technology, its limitations, and the regulatory expectations for medical device performance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the sensor's performance against established baseline specifications and manufacturer-recommended calibration intervals. This aligns with the U.S. regulatory framework, specifically the Food and Drug Administration's FDA Quality System Regulation 21 CFR Part 820, which mandates that manufacturers and users of medical devices establish and maintain procedures for device maintenance, calibration, and testing to ensure device effectiveness and safety. For clinical engineers, this translates to adhering to manufacturers' instructions for use, IFU, and established clinical engineering best practices for device management. The focus on objective performance data, comparison to known standards, and consideration of the device's intended use and patient population are all critical elements of a robust risk-based approach to device maintenance and troubleshooting, as advocated by the FDA and professional organizations like AMI. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on the device's operational status without verifying the accuracy of its sensor readings. This fails to address the potential for subtle sensor drift or degradation that might not trigger an immediate alarm, but could lead to significant diagnostic or therapeutic errors. Ethically and regulatorily, this bypasses the fundamental responsibility to ensure device accuracy and reliability, potentially violating the principles of patient safety and device efficacy mandated by the FDA. Another incorrect approach is to immediately replace the sensor based on a single, uncorroborated anomaly. A replacement might be necessary. Doing so without a thorough diagnostic assessment can lead to unnecessary costs, device downtime, and potential introduction of new issues if the original problem was not sensor-related. This approach lacks the systematic troubleshooting and data-driven decision-making expected in clinical engineering, potentially deviating from best practices for efficient and effective medical equipment management. A third incorrect approach is to assume that a sensor is functioning correctly simply because it is within its stated lifespan. Sensor performance can be affected by environmental factors, usage patterns, and inherent material degradation, irrespective of the manufacturer's projected lifespan. Relying on this assumption without verification neglects the dynamic nature of device performance and the need for ongoing monitoring and validation, which is a cornerstone of proactive medical device management and patient safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes patient safety and device efficacy. This framework begins with understanding the device's intended use and the critical parameters measured by the sensor. Next, it involves consulting the manufacturer's IFU for recommended maintenance, calibration, and troubleshooting procedures. The engineer should then gather objective performance data, comparing it against established specifications or baseline measurements. If an anomaly is detected, a systematic troubleshooting process should be initiated, involving verification of connections, environmental factors, and other potential causes before concluding sensor failure. Risk assessment should guide the decision-making process, considering the potential impact of sensor inaccuracy on patient care. Finally, all actions and findings should be meticulously documented, adhering to regulatory requirements and organizational policies. Question 15. Which approach would be most appropriate for a clinical engineering department when a report surfaces from a clinical user detailing an unexpected and potentially serious performance anomaly with a widely used Class Roman II medical device, where initial information is limited but suggests a deviation from expected operational parameters? Option A. Immediately initiate a comprehensive investigation involving device retrieval for detailed analysis, consultation with the manufacturer, and a temporary suspension of the device's use in non-critical applications pending the investigation's outcome. Option B. Rely solely on the manufacturer's existing documentation and training materials to address the reported anomaly without further independent investigation. Option C. Immediately cease all use of the device across the entire institution until the manufacturer provides a definitive statement confirming its safety. Option D. Continue routine use of the device while awaiting further reports from clinical users, assuming the anomaly is an isolated incident. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate a comprehensive investigation involving device retrieval for detailed analysis, consultation with the manufacturer, and a temporary suspension of the device's use in non-critical applications pending the investigation's outcome. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering, balancing the need for timely patient care with the imperative of robust post-market surveillance for medical devices. The professional challenge lies in the potential conflict between immediate clinical needs and the long-term safety and efficacy monitoring required by regulatory bodies. A hasty decision to continue using a device without thorough investigation could jeopardize patient safety and violate regulatory mandates. Conversely, an overly cautious approach that immediately halts all use of a device without sufficient evidence could disrupt critical patient care pathways. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the principles of risk management and regulatory compliance inherent in post-market surveillance. It prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based investigation to determine the actual risk posed by the device. This methodical process ensures that decisions are informed, proportionate, and defensible, thereby protecting patients and the healthcare organization. It also demonstrates a commitment to fulfilling the ongoing responsibilities associated with medical device use, as mandated by regulatory frameworks. An incorrect approach that involves immediately ceasing all use of the device without a preliminary risk assessment fails to adhere to the principles of proportionality and evidence-based decision-making. This could lead to unnecessary disruption of patient care and resource allocation. Another incorrect approach, which is to continue using the device without any additional monitoring or investigation, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly contravenes the spirit and letter of post-market surveillance requirements, which are designed to identify and mitigate potential risks that may emerge after a device has been introduced into clinical practice. Such an action could lead to patient harm and severe regulatory penalties. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the potential issue. This is followed by an immediate, albeit preliminary, risk assessment to determine the urgency of the situation. Next, a thorough investigation involving data collection, expert consultation, and potentially device testing should be initiated. Based on the findings of this investigation, a risk-benefit analysis should be conducted to inform the decision regarding continued use, modification of use, or removal of the device. Throughout this process, clear documentation and communication with relevant stakeholders, including clinical staff and regulatory affairs, are paramount. Question 16. The review process indicates that the clinical engineering department's strategic plan for the next fiscal year needs to be optimized to better align with the hospital's overarching goals of enhancing patient safety and improving operational efficiency. Considering the limited capital budget and the need to address both existing infrastructure needs and emerging technological opportunities, which of the following approaches would best represent a robust and compliant strategic planning process? Option A. Prioritize capital investments based on a comprehensive needs assessment that includes a thorough evaluation of current device performance, projected lifespan, maintenance costs, clinical impact, and alignment with organizational strategic objectives, while also considering emerging technologies that offer demonstrable improvements in patient care or operational efficiency. Option B. Focus exclusively on acquiring the most advanced and innovative medical technologies available on the market, assuming that cutting-edge equipment will inherently lead to improved patient outcomes and operational efficiencies, regardless of specific departmental needs or integration challenges. Option C. Allocate the majority of the capital budget to replace older, but still functional, equipment based on vendor recommendations and the perceived prestige of having the newest models, without conducting a detailed analysis of the actual clinical benefits or return on investment. Option D. Implement significant cost-cutting measures across all clinical engineering services, including deferring non-critical maintenance and reducing staff training, to free up capital for potential future technology acquisitions, with the primary goal being the reduction of the department's operating budget. The correct answer is A. Prioritize capital investments based on a comprehensive needs assessment that includes a thorough evaluation of current device performance, projected lifespan, maintenance costs, clinical impact, and alignment with organizational strategic objectives, while also considering emerging technologies that offer demonstrable improvements in patient care or operational efficiency. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering, balancing the need for technological advancement with resource constraints and the imperative to maintain patient safety and regulatory compliance. The professional challenge lies in strategically allocating limited capital and operational budgets to maximize impact on patient care, operational efficiency, and risk reduction, all while adhering to the stringent regulatory framework governing medical devices in the United States. The Certified in Clinical Engineering (CCE) designation implies a commitment to upholding these standards. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the core principles of strategic planning in clinical engineering, which are rooted in evidence-based decision-making and a holistic view of the healthcare organization's needs. This approach prioritizes initiatives that demonstrate a clear return on investment, not just financially, but also in terms of improved patient outcomes, reduced clinical risk, and enhanced operational effectiveness. It involves a systematic evaluation of current assets, future needs, and the potential impact of new technologies or process improvements. This aligns with the principles of good stewardship of resources and the ethical obligation to provide safe and effective patient care, as implicitly required by regulatory bodies like the FDA and accrediting organizations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on acquiring the latest technology without a thorough needs assessment or cost-benefit analysis fails to demonstrate responsible resource management. This could lead to underutilized or inappropriate equipment, diverting funds from critical maintenance or other essential services, and potentially introducing new risks if the technology is not properly integrated or supported. Ethically, this is a failure of fiduciary duty to the organization and its patients. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only cost reduction without considering the impact on patient safety or clinical efficacy is also professionally unacceptable. While cost-effectiveness is important, it should never come at the expense of patient well-being or the ability of clinicians to provide high-quality care. This could violate regulatory requirements related to device safety and effectiveness and ethical principles of non-maleficence. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or vendor recommendations without independent validation overlooks the critical need for objective data in strategic decision-making. This can lead to poor investments, as vendor claims may not be substantiated or may not align with the specific needs and environment of the healthcare facility. This approach lacks the rigor expected of a clinical engineer and can result in non-compliance with internal policies and potentially external regulations that require evidence-based practices. The professional reasoning process for such situations involves a structured approach. First, understanding the organization's strategic goals and clinical priorities. Second, conducting a comprehensive assessment of the current medical device inventory, including performance, maintenance costs, and user satisfaction. Third, identifying areas for improvement or innovation through data analysis, stakeholder input, and benchmarking. Fourth, developing a prioritized list of initiatives with clear objectives, expected outcomes, and resource requirements. And finally, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating the effectiveness of the chosen strategies, ensuring continuous improvement and adherence to all applicable regulations. Question 17. The analysis reveals that a hospital's clinical engineering department is evaluating a new software update for a 510K cleared diagnostic imaging device. The manufacturer states the update enhances image processing algorithms to improve diagnostic accuracy and includes minor user interface adjustments. The clinical engineering team must determine the appropriate regulatory action required by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA) for this software update. Option A. Determine if the software update constitutes a significant modification that may require a new 510K submission or potentially a PMA based on its potential impact on the device's safety and effectiveness. Option B. Immediately initiate a pre-market approval (PMA) process for the updated device, as any modification to a cleared device requires the highest level of FDA scrutiny. Option C. Assume no additional FDA review is necessary as the device is already 510K cleared and the update is from the original manufacturer. Option D. Rely solely on the manufacturer's internal assessment that the software update does not alter the device's intended use or fundamental safety and effectiveness. The correct answer is A. Determine if the software update constitutes a significant modification that may require a new 510K submission or potentially a PMA based on its potential impact on the device's safety and effectiveness. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common challenge in clinical engineering, balancing the rapid adoption of innovative medical technologies with the stringent regulatory requirements designed to ensure patient safety and device effectiveness. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a deep understanding of the FDA's regulatory framework for medical devices, specifically the nuances of pre-market notification, 510K, versus pre-market approval, PMA pathways, and the implications of modifications to legally marketed devices. Careful judgment is required to correctly categorize the device and its modifications to ensure compliance, avoid potential enforcement actions, and ultimately protect patient well-being. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a thorough understanding of the FDA's regulatory classification system and the requirements for post-market changes. By correctly identifying that a significant modification to a legally marketed device may necessitate a new 510K submission, or even a PMA if the modification alters the device's intended use or fundamental safety and effectiveness, the clinical engineer is adhering to the core principles of regulatory compliance. This proactive and informed approach ensures that the device undergoes the appropriate level of FDA review before being introduced into clinical practice, thereby upholding patient safety and device efficacy as mandated by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. An incorrect approach that suggests no additional FDA review is needed for any modification to a 510K cleared device fails to recognize that the 510K clearance is specific to the device as described in the original submission. Significant modifications that could affect the device's safety or effectiveness require reevaluation by the FDA. This represents a regulatory failure by potentially introducing a non-compliant device into patient care. Another incorrect approach, which assumes all modifications automatically require a PMA, is also a failure. While some modifications might be substantial enough to warrant a PMA, this is not a universal rule, and incorrectly escalating to a PMA pathway can lead to unnecessary delays and resource expenditure, hindering access to potentially beneficial technologies. A third incorrect approach, which relies solely on the manufacturer's assurance without independent verification of the regulatory pathway, is an ethical and professional failure. Clinical engineers have a responsibility to ensure compliance, not just to accept manufacturer claims at face value, especially when patient safety is at stake. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the device's regulatory status, the nature and extent of any proposed modifications, and the potential impact of these modifications on the device's safety and effectiveness. This involves consulting relevant FDA guidance documents, understanding the criteria for determining when a modification requires a new submission, and engaging with the manufacturer to obtain detailed information about the changes. If there is any ambiguity, seeking expert regulatory advice or directly consulting with the FDA is a prudent step. Question 18. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a critical patient monitoring system has experienced a recurring alarm malfunction over the past 3 months, leading to intermittent periods of reduced monitoring capability. The last service report details a temporary fix applied by a technician, but the problem has resurfaced. What is the most appropriate documentation and record-keeping approach to address this situation in compliance with clinical engineering best practices and regulatory expectations? Option A. Initiate a formal incident investigation. Thoroughly document the root cause analysis of the alarm malfunction. Detail all corrective actions taken, including any software updates or component replacements, and ensure this information is integrated into the device's comprehensive maintenance history and relevant quality management system records. Option B. Update the device's electronic health record with a brief note stating the alarm issue is intermittent and the last repair was a temporary adjustment, deferring a full investigation until the next scheduled maintenance cycle. Option C. Record the recurrence of the alarm issue in a departmental logbook and instruct the nursing staff to manually document each instance of the malfunction while awaiting a more permanent solution from the manufacturer. Option D. Amend the previous service report to reflect the ongoing nature of the problem and add a note indicating that the technician believes the issue is likely due to user error without conducting further technical investigation. The correct answer is B. Update the device's electronic health record with a brief note stating the alarm issue is intermittent and the last repair was a temporary adjustment, deferring a full investigation until the next scheduled maintenance cycle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical engineering where a critical piece of equipment experiences a recurring issue. The difficulty lies in balancing the immediate need for patient care with the imperative to thoroughly document and investigate the problem to prevent future occurrences and ensure regulatory compliance. The pressure to restore service quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts in documentation, which can have significant downstream consequences. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a systematic and comprehensive documentation process that aligns with regulatory requirements for medical device management and patient safety. This involves not only recording the immediate repair, but also detailing the investigation into the root cause, any corrective actions taken beyond the immediate fix, and the rationale for those actions. This thoroughness ensures that the device history record is complete, accurate, and defensible, which is crucial for audits, quality improvement initiatives, and demonstrating due diligence in device maintenance. Adherence to established protocols for incident reporting and investigation, as mandated by regulatory bodies governing healthcare technology, is paramount. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely documenting the immediate repair without investigating the underlying cause. This fails to meet the regulatory expectation of proactive risk management and continuous improvement. It leaves the potential for the issue to recur, potentially impacting patient safety and leading to further downtime. Ethically, it represents a failure to fully exercise professional responsibility in ensuring the safe and effective operation of medical equipment. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal notes or verbal communication for critical details of the investigation and repair. This is a direct violation of record-keeping requirements, which mandate clear, accurate, and retrievable documentation. Such informal methods are not auditable, can be easily lost or misinterpreted, and do not provide a reliable history of the device's maintenance and performance. This can lead to regulatory noncompliance and compromise patient safety by obscuring crucial information. A third incorrect approach is to delay or omit documentation of the root cause analysis and corrective actions. This not only hinders future troubleshooting efforts, but also prevents the organization from learning from the incident. Regulatory frameworks often require evidence of a robust quality management system, which includes thorough investigation and documentation of adverse events or recurring problems. Failure to do so undermines the integrity of the system and can result in penalties. Professional reasoning. When faced with a recurring equipment issue, a clinical engineer must prioritize a structured approach. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of patient impact and safety. 2. Thorough investigation to identify the root cause, not just the symptom. 3. Comprehensive documentation of all findings, actions, and justifications. 4. Communication of findings and recommendations to relevant stakeholders. 5. Adherence to all applicable regulatory and organizational policies for record keeping and incident reporting. This systematic process ensures patient safety, regulatory compliance, and effective asset management. Question 19. The evaluation methodology shows a new infusion pump with advanced software features being introduced into the clinical setting. To ensure patient safety, the clinical engineering department is considering various risk assessment techniques. Which combination of techniques would provide the most robust and compliant hazard analysis and risk assessment for this device, considering its complexity and potential for software-related failures? Option A. Basic checklist of common medical device failure points. Option B. Relying solely on the manufacturer's provided risk assessment documentation without independent verification. Option C. Failure mode and effects analysis (FME) for the entire device, supplemented by hazard operability (HAZOP) studies for the software control system. Option D. A simple qualitative risk matrix based on general device categories and historical incident data. Correct answer is C. Failure mode and effects analysis (FME) for the entire device, supplemented by hazard operability (HAZOP) studies for the software control system. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a critical juncture in clinical engineering practice where the selection of a risk assessment technique directly impacts patient safety and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in choosing a method that is both comprehensive enough to identify potential hazards associated with a new medical device and practical for implementation within the hospital's resource constraints. A robust risk assessment is not merely a procedural step, but a fundamental ethical and regulatory obligation to proactively mitigate harm. The correct approach, employing a failure mode and effects analysis (FME), combined with a hazard operability (HAZOP) study for specific complex subsystems, represents best professional practice. This dual approach leverages the strengths of both methodologies. FME systematically identifies potential failure modes of a device, their causes, and their effects on patient safety, allowing for the quantification of risk. HAZOP, on the other hand, is particularly adept at identifying potential hazards arising from deviations from intended design or operational parameters in complex systems, which is crucial for novel or intricate medical technologies. This comprehensive strategy aligns with the principles of proactive risk management, mandated by regulatory bodies overseeing medical device safety and clinical engineering practice, ensuring that potential risks are thoroughly understood and addressed before patient use. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on a simple checklist or a qualitative risk matrix without a systematic failure analysis. A checklist, while useful for basic compliance, often fails to uncover latent hazards or complex failure interactions. A qualitative risk matrix, without a structured method to identify failure modes and their severity, can lead to subjective assessments and missed critical risks. Relying solely on historical data without considering the unique context of the new device's implementation is also insufficient, as new technologies may introduce novel failure modes not present in past incidents. These approaches fail to meet the depth of analysis required by regulatory frameworks that emphasize a thorough understanding of device risks, potentially leading to patient harm and noncompliance with standards of care and device approval requirements. Ethically, this represents a failure to exercise due diligence in protecting patient well-being. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a clear understanding of the device's complexity and intended use. This understanding informs the selection of appropriate risk assessment tools. The clinical engineer must then consider the regulatory requirements specific to the jurisdiction, which often dictate the minimum acceptable level of risk analysis. A systematic approach, such as FME, should be the foundation, with more specialized techniques like HAZOP employed for areas of higher complexity or uncertainty. The process should involve interdisciplinary collaboration, including clinical staff and biomedical technicians, to ensure all potential failure modes and operational contexts are considered. Finally, the results of the risk assessment must be translated into actionable mitigation strategies, with a plan for ongoing monitoring and re-evaluation. Question 20. During the evaluation of a critical diagnostic imaging device, The manufacturer informs the clinical engineering department of a significant software upgrade that promises enhanced image resolution and reduced scan times. The clinical team using the device has expressed satisfaction with its current performance, but acknowledges the potential benefits of the upgrade. The manufacturer offers to implement this upgrade immediately, bypassing the standard procurement and evaluation process, citing it as a minor software enhancement. What is the most appropriate course of action for the clinical engineering department? Option A. Initiate a formal evaluation process for the software upgrade, including technical assessment, risk analysis, and validation, to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements and patient safety standards before implementation. Option B. Decline the upgrade offer from the manufacturer, as the current device performance is deemed satisfactory by the clinical team. Option C. Immediately implement the software upgrade as offered by the manufacturer, prioritizing the potential benefits of enhanced image resolution and reduced scan times for patient care. Option D. Implement the upgrade based on the clinical team's positive feedback on the current device and the manufacturer's assurance of a minor enhancement, without further formal review. The correct answer is A. Initiate a formal evaluation process for the software upgrade, including technical assessment, risk analysis, and validation, to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements and patient safety standards before implementation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in clinical engineering, where a perceived immediate benefit to patient care conflicts with established procurement policies and potential long-term risks. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of a clinical need with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements and organizational procedures designed to ensure patient safety, device efficacy, and financial accountability. The clinical team's direct experience with the device's limitations, coupled with the manufacturer's offer of an unapproved upgrade, creates pressure to bypass standard protocols. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance by initiating a formal evaluation process for the proposed upgrade. This aligns with the principles of good clinical engineering practice and regulatory frameworks that mandate thorough assessment of medical devices before implementation. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA) regulation, specifically 21 CFR Part 820, Quality System Regulation, require that manufacturers establish procedures for the design, manufacturing, and distribution of medical devices, and that healthcare facilities ensure devices used in patient care meet these standards. Implementing an unapproved upgrade without proper vetting could violate these regulations, potentially leading to device malfunction, patient harm, and regulatory noncompliance. A formal evaluation ensures the upgrade has undergone appropriate testing, validation, and if necessary, regulatory clearance or approval, thereby safeguarding patient well-being and maintaining the integrity of the medical device inventory. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately accepting the manufacturer's offer and implementing the upgrade without any formal review. This bypasses critical safety and efficacy checks mandated by regulatory bodies like the FDA. It represents a failure to adhere to organizational policies for device modification and procurement, potentially exposing patients to risks associated with unvalidated technology. This approach also undermines the established quality management systems designed to ensure device safety and effectiveness. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the manufacturer's offer outright without any investigation. While caution is warranted, a complete refusal without understanding the nature and potential benefits of the upgrade could mean missing an opportunity to improve patient care or device performance. This approach fails to engage in a proactive and analytical problem-solving process, which is a core responsibility of clinical engineering. It also neglects the potential for a legitimate and beneficial technological advancement. A third incorrect approach is to implement the upgrade based solely on the clinical team's anecdotal positive experience with the current device and the manufacturer's assurances. Anecdotal evidence, while valuable for identifying potential issues, is not a substitute for rigorous technical evaluation and validation. Regulatory frameworks emphasize objective evidence of safety and effectiveness, which cannot be solely derived from user testimonials or manufacturer claims without independent verification. Professional reasoning. Clinical engineers must adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. understanding the clinical need and the proposed solution. 2. Consulting relevant regulatory requirements, e.g., FDA guidelines for device modifications and upgrades. 3. Reviewing organizational policies and procedures for procurement and device implementation. 4. Initiating a formal evaluation process that may include technical assessment, risk analysis, and validation testing. 5. Documenting all steps and decisions. 6. Communicating findings and recommendations to relevant stakeholders. This structured approach ensures that decisions are grounded in patient safety, regulatory compliance, and best professional practice.